Florida State recruiting gets two crystal balls.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for your first purchase. Today's show is going to discuss class of 26 recruits and some of the keys to that class. We need to start building and figuring out what is and what is not important for Florida State to do in that class. We're also going to talk about several of the impact guys that Florida State Seminoles just signed, but we're going to start with a couple of guys that got crystal balls for the Noles, and we're going to talk about that now with Zach over at 24/7. Shout out to him for this. I thought they were probably going to get him, but nothing like putting your name out there. So here are the two guys in question. Chaston Brown from Northside High School in Warner Robins, offensive tackle. That's a kid that Florida State got in on because at one point, UCF had his commitment. Well, Herb Hand is the offensive line coach at UCF that is now at Florida State. So there's a connection there, and he offered him. Looks good. He's going to be visiting Florida State later this month. Unique prospect, 6'6", 6'7", 270, plays against good competition. Warner Robins, that area is fantastic. All three high schools there, Warner Robins High, Northside, and Houston County, are going to produce talent each year. It's one of the best football cities in the South. So he's used to competition. That's good news. Also, Brown's frame is something that I like. He's not filled out yet. He's not one of those kids that is real bulky and is overweight. He's a long, lean athlete that can be built properly, if you will. 6'6", 6'7" is good for offensive tackles. And by the way, just throwing this out there, Florida State needs more of those from the high school ranks too. Finally, with him, this is a young man from Georgia. We talk about it a lot here on Locked On Seminoles. You got to recruit Georgia well if you're going to be a dominant program at Florida State. Getting kids from Central and South Georgia was Bowden's bread and butter to help cement his classes because obviously they did very well inside the Sunshine State. But Bowden robbed Georgia for decades and got not just one or two guys. He'd get 3 or 4 guys a year out of that state that would be multi-year starters quite often. So Florida State is doing a smart move here. I also like the connection with Herb because he's known him for a long time, and Herb Hand obviously has a really great rep. He's coached at Texas, Auburn, UCF, and other places. He knows Gus well. They coached together even back in the day at multiple stops as well. So this will be a good fit. The other guy is also a key player that offensive line we talked about a little bit yesterday, and that is Chavez, the Sandman Thompson. He is a kid from Florida. He's going to play center if he comes to Florida State. Zach also put a crystal ball in for him as well. Originally committed to Oregon, ended up flipping to FIU, and now Florida State is trying to get him 6'1", give or take 300 pounds. He's played offensive line and defensive line. I'm curious if there's a position that he would play in terms of what he would like, if it's center or if it's D-tackle. I'm not sure, but I've seen him play live, and this kid is a bull in a china shop. Physicality, likes playing in the run game, and he's not going to get outworked. He's just a football player. Be honest with yourself. How often did you feel comfortable over the last 3-4 years with where Florida State was with their offensive line, just beating up on people, not using scheme, etc.? This is the kind of guy that will root you out and will out-effort other players. Florida State needs more of that in their program in general. I think we can also all agree on that. If he ends up anywhere else, it would be a surprise. I thought they were going to get him, but I didn't make any public declaration per se. So once again, credit to Zach over at 24/7 Noles for the prediction. As the class finalizes, because Florida State's one of the few schools that's still quite active with the 25 class, there isn't all good news. From what it sounds like, Ty Haywood, the stud offensive tackle out of Texas, probably going to be Michigan. It sounds like it's more and more headed that direction, but I have not heard anything else. And also to that point, if Brown's going to commit, I would think that's another pretty clear point that Florida State is going to take the best player they can and not just wait on something at the end, because Haywood may decide on signing day if you didn't get him, you'd be missing out on an offensive tackle quite possibly. Brown, maybe you don't get him as well. So I'd rather take one it's right in front of you instead of waiting long term. It's not a good idea. Florida State needs numbers at offensive tackle, guys with upside. And I get that Haywood's the better pure prospect right now, but Brown has a lot of upside himself, so we'll see. As far as the rest of the class, as a reminder, Antonio Cromartie Jr. committed last night. I put up a podcast about that last night. I think that's a good addition to the Florida State class, but it's not something that should be shocking. Again, his dad's Antonio Cromartie, longtime NFL player and former San Diego Charger, was a great player at Florida State. I don't think that should be a shock, but do not underestimate him just because he wasn't ranked as high as some guys. I go into detail about that in the podcast I did yesterday. Make sure you check that out. Before we kind of jump into some of the kids with the class of 25, like the impact, I want to make another statement here that I touched on yesterday. Kudos to the Florida State staff, whether it's the coaching staff, the recruiting guys and gals, everybody in the recruiting office, they picked it up. This is something that many people, well beyond just me, Florida State media in general, have discussed. Florida State needed another level, another gear, if you will, with the high school recruiting scene. I don't know if it's because of Norvell's job being on the hot seat. I don't know if it's in combination with the new hires. Whatever it is, Florida State, it just feels different. Not just high school recruiting either. They did a nice job getting junior college players. They've done a nice job with the portal so far. Talent acquisition overall is on the rise, and it's about time. Florida State shouldn't ever be in a scenario where they're lagging behind multiple programs in the ACC. Like if Clemson or Miami has better talent in a given year, that's never been uncommon. Florida State was always competitive, but one program or another might have had more. Florida State, they missed so badly with their portal additions and how poorly, specifically with the offensive line they'd recruited out of high school ranks. It's unbelievable. They weren't even in the top 10 on the offensive line at any point this season. And overall, they might have had the worst offensive line in the P4. That's because of their lack of hitting the right marks along the offensive line out of high school ranks for years. So it's good to see things are trending in the right direction. Now, as for Florida State impact players in 25, there's one kid that I'm going to talk about it with a question that kind of behind the scenes a little bit that I'm just a big fan of. I'll get to that in a second. But first off, I've just got 3 questions, and I'm going to go out with the first one. If you have a comment on this, please hit me up on YouTube at the Locked On Seminoles channel, comment, question, whatever. Does anybody do better as a true freshman for Florida State this next season than Chroma, the running back out of Lee County High School in Leesburg, Georgia? It's debatable. Running back is one of the easiest positions, historically speaking, for a young man to make an impact. I'm not arguing at that. But at the same time, that's not exactly a room that Florida State needed an impact player to have a good room. I think Rodell's coming back. We'll see. I need to see how that goes. You got Cam, you got Sam, you got Danzy. It's like there's plenty of talent. Now, that's not all of them, but there's plenty of talent there. So I don't think it's as big a slam dunk as what other people are saying. And I'm not against, like I'm a huge fan of Chroma. I've seen him play multiple times. He's really, really good. No doubt. But that does not mean that he's the guy that's going to end up being like a starter or just an instant impact guy automatically. He's going to have to earn it. Playbook. Does he have the ability to pass protect? That's always the big question with running backs. Those are just a couple of the questions. But who else would be the most likely guy to walk into the lineup in at least a rotational role? I hate picking freshmen to start right away as a general rule. That's hard. But which guy or guys could it be? Well, just kind of looking at the list overall and Florida State's commitments, I don't think there's anybody that quote unquote fits it. But as odd as it is, the position that might be the hardest to play early is interior defensive line because of strength, understanding technique and all that, especially if you come from a smaller school. That being the case, it would not surprise me that another Georgia kid ends up being the most likely to make a major impact, and that's Kevin Wynn. Now, Florida State, again, they got some transfers. They got a junior college kid coming in. You got Daryl Jackson, etc. But I think Wynn could play either the strong side defensive end or nose guard spots. He's give or take 340 pounds. He's a big dude, but I really just think he's an anomaly. A 340-pound player playing strong side end is ridiculous, but he's that athletic, and he just beats up on guys. He might be the most impactful freshman defensive lineman in the country that's not a pure edge guy and then just rushes the passer. There'll be somebody somewhere that might have a bigger impact than Kevin because it's really hard to double team those guys. But even as an interior guy where you can get more bodies and more hands towards him, I think he's going to have an impact this next season, and he's my pick as the biggest impact, like on down to down, and not counting special teams here. That's a whole nother animal. Down to down, I think Kevin will have as much, if not more, of an impact than Chroma. Wynn is just that good a football player. So we'll see. Second question. How quickly can Mario Nash Jr. assimilate to the Florida State, not just playbook, but like all the do's and don'ts of being an offensive lineman at the college football level? He's one of my favorite recruits in this class on the offensive line, regardless of Florida State or otherwise. I'm just talking about the class of 25. Kid out of Mississippi, had him here on the show. I think by the end of this season, if everything went right, A, he's got to stay healthy. B, he's got to continue to get stronger. He wants to get up just over 300 pounds. He was 285, 290 the last time I spoke with him. And then finally, does he have that want to and that desire in the offseason to get to that weight and do all the little things? Because it's so competitive now that they've got several good players coming in from the portal. Can he push any of them? I don't know. Would he be willing to play guard? I don't know. These are some of the questions that you got to have. And quite frankly, it's not an easy thing to do. Final question. How good is Ethan Pritchard? I brought him up before on this show, and I just want to bring it up again. This is a linebacker out of Seminole High School that you all need to know. I mentioned a minute ago, special teams. Out of the freshman group, I'm convinced he will be the best freshman. Punt team, kickoff teams, all that. He's an inside linebacker that doesn't care which spot he plays, Mike or Will. He will go after you, blitzer, coverage, whatever you need. He's a guy that was good as a freshman. We knew about him in the media for a long time. Florida State got a good one, and he will fit in any scheme. I don't care if it's 4-3, 3-3-5, and in the nickel, the dime package, Pritchard's going to be a guy. I think he could be a player that competes for a starting role as a sophomore. I really do. He's a very good football player, and he's just got the motivation you're looking for. That program is historically great, too. So if you like baseball and you're like me in your 50s, Tim Raines is from there. I mean, they've always had athletes, period. So this is a great football program. Florida State gets a kid out of there, and they need linebackers. So maybe Pritchard has a chance to come in and compete for immediate playing time beyond special teams too. Who knows? But he's a really good player. When we come back, we're going to have more recruiting information here on Locked on Seminoles. If you have not downloaded the Gametime app, you should do so right now. Gametime has new features called Gametime Picks that makes everything easier once you're inside the app. So if you want to go to a movie theater, you want to go to the college football playoff, if you want to go to the NFL playoffs, if you want to go to a Magic game, if you want to go see anything just under the sun, if it's an arena, there's a pretty good chance you can find it on your fingertips at Gametime. Recently, Gametime Picks was something that I looked at when I was looking at a Magic game. They had tickets for under $40 that were good tickets. You can go through, browse it, real easy. Just type in whatever team you want. And once you get into a game, there's a tab that says Gametime Picks. Make sure you check it out. Plus the on-time ticket delivery and the lowest price guarantee are something that you should check out because that makes it great. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Florida State has a lot of things going on in the class of 26. This coming weekend and the weekend after, they're going to have junior days. As I noted a few minutes ago, hats off to the staff, the recruiting staff, everybody involved. It's a lot of work to get those things done, but it's the difference between winning and losing. So I've got 10 questions and comments. And again, if you're on the YouTube channel, check it out. Locked on Seminoles, comment, question, whatever you want to do on this. But I got 10 questions about the class of 26, the kids that will be finishing up their junior years this spring and then heading into the summer, will be taking official visits to Florida State and other programs. Number one, Brady Smeagol, the quarterback from California that's been committed to Florida State. What's that circumstance going to be like once we get to like March or April? I'm sure other schools are going to come after him, and I know Gus has went out to see him and all that, but how does that matriculate? I'm open-endedly asking because this is rare as it gets. I have no opinion on this. I have no idea how this is going to play out. He is more of a pocket passer. He could run some, sure, but Brady is better when he's in the pocket or semi-roll, bootleg, waggle, kind of like more of a Danny Cannell kind of quarterback, to put it into perspective for those of you that remember Danny. But he's also a guy that is open-minded. He likes Gus. He likes Norvell. And I can tell you this from just talking to him face-to-face at last year's Future 50, this is a quarterback that loved the Florida State visit. He visited schools all across the country. His family took him all over the place. He thought Florida State was home. And if you think about it, that's a pretty important factor. Does he stick with Florida State? Does somebody else get him to visit? I have no idea, but he is not a perfect fit for Gus's offense. Not in my opinion, and I don't think anybody else would say so either. I'm curious to see how that one plays out, and we'll see. But he's a really good football player. Number 2, can Florida State find a top nose guard? Now, I just talked about Kevin Wynn a few minutes ago. 100% a home run. As good an interior D lineman as there was in the class of 25. Florida State signed him. Especially moving to a 3-3-5, that's a home run. But can you at least find somebody that's another 6'2", 290-pound guy that is willing to at least occasionally two-gap? That's not much fun. It means literally, like you would think, taking on 2 guys because you got a gap on each side of the player you're in front of. It's just about power. That's not always the most friendly thing to do. Now, they'll do some other things. They're not just going to be a 2-gap defense. But you need guys like that have that capability, especially for short yardage and to run a complete package with a 3-man line. You need some guys that can do it, and you got to sign them every year because some guys are going to fall by the wayside because they didn't work hard enough or didn't go to class, whatever it is. You can never, in a 3-man line, be short on nose guards. You will get murdered. So can Florida State get a true nose guard? Class of 26, I'm sure there will be several guys that come to fruition that we need to talk about over time. And they've got a handful of really good defensive linemen coming over the next 2 weeks, by the way, for Junior Day. We'll get into more of that as the week goes on. But if they can get a big-time nose guard each and every year, as long as Coach White, Coach Potroast, those guys are on campus in Tallahassee, that'll be the key. Got to have a nose guard. Number 3, Florida State's history, especially because of Deion, is about corner. That along with pass rushers. Peter Boulware is probably my favorite Florida State player of all time because he was just so spectacular, especially in clutch moments. Boulware would get there. But can you find another guy like they're doing? I talked about this yesterday. A great job of coaching up the players they have, recruiting at a high level, everything in the secondary. But if you're going to get to elite status again, I'm just going to bring up something that I'll probably hit on for months. The teams that made the Final Four of the playoff, just about every guy that started in their secondary is going to at least, at minimum, get drafted. Several of them will probably go in the first 3 rounds. It's a DB world because it's a passing world. There are very few teams that have the ability to man up and go against some of these receivers. Can Florida State go out and not just get good DBs in this class? Can they go out and get the guy at corner, whoever it ends up being? And Javari Flowers is one of them I've spoken with. That's a kid out of Miami Northwestern that they're after. Probably as good a starting point as you can get. Could they get somebody like him or somebody else? Maybe it's even better. Everybody's got their opinion. But a true national, at minimum, top 10 guy, but preferably a top 5 corner. In my opinion, this is about numbers. It's kind of like a quarterback. Some guys are going to transfer. They don't work out. Florida State's in a good spot at corner, but you need to stay there as you build your front 7 too. When you have a multitude of corners, you can run so many more things in your back end and confuse other teams to create turnovers and get the ball back. The only way you do that is with a gazillion players that are good all over the place, just rotating guys like Florida State did in the 80s and 90s. Straight up. Same thing that Jimbo did in 2013 and 14. They had more depth than just about everybody they played. That's why Florida State was so good. We'll see. But I think signing an elite corner, especially with this staff, you got Sertan, that kind of helps. Coach Coop coming over from Nebraska, he's a good recruiter, South Florida guy. I'm curious to see if they can get a big-time corner. When we come back, we're going to finish up the list on the 26 kids. Got a lot of big-time prospects still looking at the Noles. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little tender, loving care. You can always find that decluttering and refreshing your place helps you get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. For me, I was just on their website, and I need some new lighting for my apartment, and I also need a new cabinet. I had no idea they had that many different things. It's just hard to narrow down what I want right away, but I'm going to get something from there myself. And it's also pretty easy because they've got free delivery options and they've got other specials going on. They got sales. So it's pretty cool. There's something for every style at home, no matter what your space or budget is like. Wayfair makes it easy for you to tackle the New Year's home goals. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head over to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Continuing on with the class of 2026, some of the goals based on some questions I have. Can Florida State get a total offensive line? And if they decide to take 4, that's fine. But 2 tackles and a guy that can play center is a great starting point. But I prefer they got 5 guys in this class so they can finally start matriculating towards not needing to hit the portal. At least 4 guys that are like 4-star level, big-time players. They've got a kid already committed, but at the end of the day, when you sign, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about commitments. Everybody that they bring in has a spot that they can play, and hopefully there are multiple too. Guys that are able to play multiple positions, they're open-minded. That is the objective here. Also, Florida State needs to win some of these battles inside the state. This is something I'm going to go over several times for the rest of this pod. Inside the state, there's going to be some big battles for good players inside Florida between the Canes and the Gators. Just those battles alone, and plus, Georgia's going to come into town, Auburn, Crimson Tide, etc. Florida State needs to win more battles in state for top offensive linemen. Number 5, this is a pet peeve. Florida State has not done the greatest of jobs over time recruiting quarterbacks, recruiting running backs, D linemen, corners, whatever it is. They've had a little success, but IMG Academy has not been the greatest success rate for Florida State. They need to do better there. Will they? I don't know, but you got several guys coming over from Nebraska. You got, I think, this is probably as hard as Norvell's been involved with recruiting, really delving into it. Maybe this changes. They've got to get more kids from IMG, especially the top tier guys. I know many of them from out of state, but I go to visit IMG multiple times a year. It's insane how many of those kids are at least interested in Florida State just from off the record conversations, but they rarely get them. Will the class of 26 be the year that changes? We need to see. Will they sign any one of the top Florida players that, like, I don't care what position it is, but like a top 5 guy? When I was growing up, Bowden and his group, it wasn't whether they were going to sign a top 5 player in Florida. It was whether they were going to get 2 or more. They could sign 3 of them. And one of them might have been from Miami Northwestern or St. Thomas Aquinas, Deerfield Beach. It could have been anywhere down there, even right next to Miami. Can they sign one of those top 5 guys? Part of this is recruiting cachet. You're trying to build your roster. You can sell playing time. That's pretty obvious. You have guys with a tremendous amount of connections to South Florida, both your DB coaches, just for starting. The staff has familiarity with recruiting South Florida in general. And finally, it's Florida State. You're an in-state school. You should be able to. They've got to hit on the elite kids in South Florida and throughout the state. Trenton Henderson, arguably the most important player in the state, is from the Pensacola area. He's getting ready to visit next weekend. That's a great start, too. If they got him, that would be a great way to do it. Pass rushers never go out of style there. But you've got to get some of these elite kids. Can you get more than one? If you do, you got a chance to have a top 10 class, maybe even a top 6 class. That's where Florida State has to be to get back on track. Next, can you beat Miami, not just for players, but for a Derrek Cooper, for Javari Flowers, for any of the kids that they're coveting from South Florida. I'll just leave it at those two guys. I've met both of them, been around them. Jabari Brady, whatever one. Can you beat them for one of those guys? Mario Cristobal is about as good a recruiter as a head coach as there is in college football. Beating him for a kid that he's coveted is not easy. There's a lot of different players in South Florida they're going to go after, but it'll go to Jacksonville. It'll go to Orlando, Tampa. Florida State is going to be going after a bunch of the same guys that Miami is. You need to start beating Miami more often inside the border, in Florida too, for that matter, but especially Miami, if you're going to get back to being a top program. Next, same question, but in the state of Georgia, can you beat UGA? Florida State actually did that this year, coming off a 2-10 season. They got Wynn and Chroma, just for starters. Looks like they're probably going to get Chaston Brown. I mean, that's pretty good. Can you get a couple more big-time players from the Peach State? Maybe more. However many you get, but I'm talking about like top guys. The UGA didn't just offer early, then tailed off, that they coveted until National Signing Day. Can you beat them for those guys? Nationally, Florida State historically, when they've had their best classes, will sprinkle in 1 to 4 players from maybe the DMV, maybe it's a kid from Pennsylvania, maybe Illinois, maybe Texas, maybe California, Colorado, whatever. How many elite kids can they get from around the country? Not all of them have to be elite, but can they get somebody that's big time from any of those areas? It's still Florida State. I know it's 2-10 season and all that, but they've got massive staff turnover. They got guys with new contacts in different regions of the country. Maybe it's a kid from New Jersey. I don't know. But to complement, and it doesn't need to be many, but to complement the down south recruiting, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida in particular, can you get 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 guys from outside the normal region that where Florida State does its best recruiting to make this an elite class? Final question. Can you reduce, this might be the most important one, can you reduce the transfer portal need after next season by having a complete class in 26? What do I mean by complete class? Basically, do you have a class that doesn't have any holes when you're done? Especially O-line. Make no mistake, portal, the biggest need was O-line. It will be high school recruiting. It's O-line again. So you can get back on track, balanced roster, balanced depth chart, class to class to class. But that being the case, you still need to do good. They had a good D-line class. They got Chroma. Every position can you do well. Not every position has to be 100% elite, but is there no obvious hole in this 2026 class when you're done? That's a checkbox, yes or no. If they need kickers or whatever, I don't know. Situationally, that's a little different, but just positionally with your O and your D, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, if you're going to take portal anywhere, kicker, punter, I'm okay with that. But besides that, I really want to see Florida State not just do well, but do really good, really balanced class at all the spots. It has been a while since they've done that to the level they need, because they'd either be short on numbers at a spot, even if the quality is good, kind of like O-line this year. They got a couple of good players, but they need 5. They're not going to end up there, I don't think. Looks like they might get to 4, but some of them are still guys that have some development to go. We'll see. They need 2 or 3 guys at Mario Nash's level, just as an example, on the offensive line to make this an elite class. So with that, just think about it this way. Florida State is a lot closer to getting back to where they need to than I thought they'd be at this point. But to finish the job, this 26 class is massive. The Noles must hit a home run with this balanced class, fit your positions of need, and fit your schemes. Everything. This must be a tremendous class. They're off to a good start, but now they got to really ramp it up with these junior days, and we'll see where they're at. And I'll keep you updated here on Locked On Seminoles. Hit that like button, that notification bell, and subscribe to the Locked On Seminoles podcast. I truly appreciate it. And share it with anybody you could so I can get in front of more Noles fans. Everybody have a good one. I'll see you again very soon.